A lot of people, when they think about fishing a swim bait, they think about fishing it mid-column, reeling that bait with a slow, steady retrieve around grass or boulder fields, and having big smallmouth come up and eat this thing. But in today's video, I'm going to talk about how to fish this small swim bait as an alternative to a tube to trick big fish into biting. Now, if you guys don't know who I am, my name is Benjamin Nowak, and this channel is dedicated to teaching you bass fishing tips, taking you on trips, and teaching you about things like unique ways to fish a small swim bait that will trick big fish into biting. So if you guys enjoy that style of content, please consider subscribing to the channel and growing this community. But I'd also like to know if you guys have some really unique ways that you fish baits that maybe other guys aren't using to catch big fish. So let me know down in the comment section down below. But without further ado, let's dive into this thing. Now, if you guys have been following my Instagram or my stories here on YouTube, one thing that I've been posting a lot about are some really big fish catches these past couple of weeks, taking a small swim bait, casting it out, and you'll see me make a couple short hops and getting big fish to bite this thing. On that little drop kick shad again. That bait is so seriously good. This is a technique that works year round, but especially as we push into that summer to fall transition, or you're sight fishing for bass up in the shallows, like if you're fishing clean water, you can see them swimming. This is a deadly effective approach. It's also something you can do with forward facing sonar. However, you don't need to see them and you don't need to see them on your scope to make this bait work really effectively for you. Now, fishing a swim bait along bottom is really nothing new. A lot of guys will take a swim bait and they'll crawl it really slowly with the reel handle. They'll count rocks with this. But what I'm talking about in this video is actually taking this bait and fishing it like a tube. Taking this bait, making a really long cast away from the boat and fishing it along the bottom like a tube, like a Ned rig, taking this bait and dragging it along. One of the cool things about a small swim bait is the drawing power that this bait has. And this is something I've talked about a lot with small hair jigs, marabou jigs, you know, the drawing power of those techniques. And I think it's equally so, or if not more, in a small body swim bait. It's just a very natural presentation that draws fish to that bait, and it looks like what those fish are keying in on. This is an extremely powerful technique. Anytime you have fish located and they don't want to bite a tube and they don't want to bite a drop shot, even a Ned rig, a small swim bait hopped along the bottom presents them a unique presentation that looks exactly like what they're feeding on with a little bit more action than your standard dead stick approach. So let's start by talking about the gear that I'm using. And to me, the most important thing is the swim bait that you choose. You need a swim bait that will kick at really, really slow speeds. You want one that has a really natural action, a smaller profile typically. This is the Great Lakes Finesse 275 drop kick shad, and the color is smelt. If I could only have one color in the drop kick shad, it's going to be the smelt color, that brown back with a little bit of gold flake and that white with black flake belly. Looks like gobies, looks like perch, looks like a bunch of different bait fish. And as you guys can tell, this one's seen a couple fish. The eyes have been knocked off it finally. Some other really good colors are this green pumpkin shad. You have that green pumpkin back. It's a little bit more translucent, super natural, looks like a shiner. Just does a really good job imitating bait fish. Or this goby color. Again, it's just a really natural goby style color. It doesn't really matter as long as you're matching the forage that you're fishing around. Really, that smelt color, if you could only have one, it's going to be my go-to. Some other baits that work for you are like a Megabass Spark Shad in 3 inches. Kitech Easy Shiner between like 3 and 4 inches long is kind of where you want to be. Or the Beast Coast Slow Flow 2.8 size. The other big key for me is having a really good ball head or football head jig. Now, I actually pour this one at home. This is a Do It Molds round ball jig head, but you want something in that 1/8 to 3/8 ounce zone, depending on the depth you're fishing and the size of the body of water. Like if it's really rough or you're fishing in really heavy current, you want to match the size of the head to the depth that you're fishing that bait. Typically, if I'm fishing, you know, less than 10 foot of water, I'll try to get away with an 1/8 ounce head. It's really slow fall. Fishes very lightly along the bottom, gives that bait a nice gliding action. Anything from like 10 to 15 foot, I'll go up to a 1/4 ounce. Anything deeper than 15, I'll go to like a 3/8 ounce. But you just want to be able to keep that bait along the bottom and give that bait nice action when you're fishing it down there on the bottom of your lake. The other critical thing that a lot of guys might overlook is the speed of the fall of that bait coming through the water. Now, I think one thing we can all agree on is that smallmouth are visual feeders. They see that bait enter the water and swim on the fall. They're going to, a lot of times, eat that bait within the first few hops. So having a slower fall is really, really critical in a lot of situations. You want that fish to be able to have as much time as possible seeing that bait swim through the column, and come down to the bottom. And so I'll try to go with the lightest head I can possibly get away with. Another thing that I find really, really important is being able to make that long cast away from the boat, but still being able to get a positive hook set into those fish. A lot of guys like to go to too light of a rod, especially with this technique where it's a single jig hook. You can kind of beef up on the rod that you're using, but you just need something you can make really long casts with. So I'm fishing the TFO TACTION 7-4 medium moderate. This is really designed as a small swim bait rod, and especially once you get up into that 1/4 ounce or 3/16 ounce jig head, this is probably the best rod on the market. It loads up super deep in the blank, so a lot of times you don't throw those fish and you can get a positive hook set because it is that medium power. So that's the general gear setup, but as we get into how to fish this bait, I don't think it's all that difficult. If you're good at fishing a tube or you like fishing a Ned rig, this is actually going to be a very, very similar approach. But what this bait does that I think those other techniques lack is the action on the fall and really looking incredibly natural. Now, obviously, a Ned rig looks really natural along the bottom. It stands up, you know, it's just a do-nothing approach. It's really, really simple and non-intrusive, but I think a swim bait takes it to another level. Like, this looks just like a goby. It can imitate a bait fish swimming through the column dying. This is just such a natural approach. And it actually kind of goes back to like the old school grub fishing. Those guys that would take the 3-inch smoke grub and you'd fish it with slow, steady hops or slowly turn the reel handle to drag that bait on the bottom. It just looks really, really natural. It's super small presentation. It's non-intrusive. It looks like a goby, looks like a crawfish, looks like a perch or bait fish that swims to the bottom. And it's a very easy meal for those fish to digest. One thing that's really cool that you can do as well, and this is something I learned with the sight fishing aspect of it, is you can take this bait and pendulum it to bottom so it actually allows that bait to get a longer fall. And what you'll do is you'll cast that bait out and then kind of close the bail so you have a tight line, and that bait will come, hit the water, and start to swim through the column and swim to the bottom. And then what I'll do with that technique is I'm going to hop it up like 3 or 4 times, and a lot of times those hops and pulls are pretty hard. I want this bait to come off the bottom and then kick on the fall, come off the bottom, kick on the fall, and really using those big hops to get that fish's attention. Like I mentioned again, most of these bites are coming within the first 15 feet of the cast, like getting that bait to fall to the bottom, you know, 3 or 4 short hops, and that's when a lot of those bites are actually happening. It's not typically way, way back towards the boat. And so having a really natural presentation, something that looks just like what those fish are keying in on, and those fish can find really easily, in my opinion, is very, very important. Now, where would I fish this bait? And for me, this is something I'm going to fish in those same locations that I would fish a tube or a drop shot. What's unique is that you can reel this and you can kind of get a bite to figure out where fish are located. But when you're fishing it on bottom, I'm fishing in those same locations that I'm fishing a tube or drop shot. This is a perfect alternative in those zones where you know those fish are living. So what do I mean by that? I'm really making targeted casts to specific areas. This is not something that I'll just randomly drag around if I don't know fish are there, because it is a slower approach. I'm looking to locate where those fish are at, and then I'm going to fish this bait through there to maximize that zone, maximize that area. So the time and place where I'm actually dragging this bait is when I have fish located or have a very specific location that I'm trying to fish. Now, typically those locations for me, especially during that summer to fall transition, are going to be those transitional edges, those areas where you have a bottom composition change. Maybe you have perch grass in the middle of a sand field, or you have big boulders surrounded by small rocks or mud. Like, I'm fishing those transitional areas where I know those fish are hanging out. One of the coolest places that I fish this, and I've seen the power of this technique, is actually in this big perch grass field. So you have this big, long sand flat, and I located, you know, maybe a 2-boat size area where there was some perch grass on the bottom. And I knew there were smallmouth that were living on that edge. There were smallmouth that were feeding on the bait fish and the gobies and the crawdads. In that perch grass, I would take this small swim bait, I'd cast that bait into the sand, and I would fish that bait just up to the edge of that grass. The other cool thing about this presentation is how weedless it can naturally be, because once this bait gets bogged down, you can snap it out of that grass. It shoots out just like a little goby and then goes back into the grass. At perch grass, although it is kind of grabby and it will kind of grab that hook, you can really use that rod to snap this bait free, hop that bait free out of that grass, and that's when a lot of those bites are going to come. Another thing you might notice too is pay attention to the way those fish are eating this bait. This is something that a lot of those fish, they'll eat it when that bait is falling back down, and they're going to have it way, way back deep in the mouth. It's very similar to the way they eat a tube, right? They get on that bait and that tube is all the way buried in their mouth. But one thing I like about this is how natural and small that presentation is. So there's nothing that is going to prevent that fish from getting a hook in their mouth. Unlike a tube where a lot of those fish will ball that tube up around that hook point, the hook to land ratio on this is very, very successful. It's a very, very high hook to land ratio. I did lose a giant fishing this as he came up and surged next to the boat. He like jumped 6 foot over the net and he came off, but that is more so just due to that fish being a super smart acrobatic fish. But the hook to land ratio on this presentation is extremely, extremely high because it's a very small bait with a good hook gap, and there's nothing for him to ball up around that hook. So while you might fish a tube in that area and get bites, they're going to eat this bait, in my opinion, as much or more than they'll eat a tube, and the hook to land ratio is much, much higher. So for me, this is really just an alternative to a tube. I'm fishing it in very specific locations, those perch grass areas, you know, those bottom composition changes, those small turns, those areas where you know fish are hanging out, and you need a presentation where you can drag through there or fish along the bottom to trick those fish into biting. I'd be really curious if you guys have ever tried this technique, whether it's with sight fishing, getting fish to come up behind your bait and then killing it, letting it swim to bottom, having them eat it that way, or just casting a swim bait out and fishing it like a tube. But this is a deadly, deadly approach. Fishing a swim bait in those same areas you'd fish a tube or a drop shot is something that will get you more and bigger bites than guys fishing around you. Now, if you guys enjoyed this video, please do me a huge favor. Hit that thumbs up button. It helps boost this video to more people so it gets seen and I can share with you guys more fishing tips. If you're not already subscribed, hit that picture of me right there. It will subscribe you to the channel and let you know when I post more videos just like this one. Or if you want to see more fall smallmouth fishing videos, click this video right here. It's going to give you some awesome insight in how I locate fall smallmouth. But as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Take care, tight lines. God bless. Pursue your passion.